Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to take a look at how the Lib Dems and Reform UK may be looking at exerting maximum influence on the general election, which should be taking place sometime next year. Labour and the Conservatives are the main event, of course, but the Lib Dems and Reform UK will also be instrumental. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So the Lib Dems and Reform UK, very interesting strategic game to play for many of the marginal constituencies around England in particular. A lot of unusual features coming up in this election, but you know, the main ones, after basically 14 years of failure and neglect, voters really do want a change of government. There's always some level of tactical voting in elections, a necessity of our archaic first past the post system, but this year is going to be, or the next year is going to be, a bumper year for it. Not only because the need is again really clear enough to enough people, but because there are organised campaigns informing the public about it, like stopthetories.vote, for example. Another feature is that there'll be far more contestable seats than usual. Ordinarily, you don't have that many seats which are realistically up for grabs, 100, 150, something like that amongst the various parties. You know, it's why Labour looked so down and out at the last election. It was almost like, well, if they took every marginal constituency they were contesting, it's still not quite enough for a majority. So it needed Labour to not only present themselves more favourably, but the Tories really had to screw the public over to the point where formerly safe seats were becoming marginal. Something they did with a great deal of energy. So lots of seats are now winnable, maybe some seats you wouldn't have thought of before, and vote splitting is no longer a problem just for Labour, but the Tories as well. Might actually be worse for the Tories. I'm going to look at the breakdown of the latest YouGov poll. Now, I'm going to point out that all the online pollsters, including YouGov, do seem to inflate Reform UK's vote when you sort of compare to actual by-election results. But YouGov provide easy access to their data, so I'm going to use it anyway, and they do tend to be reasonably accurate when you compare to general election results. Besides, the video is largely about perception, and so many politicians will treat these polls as like literal reality. Now, in the breakdown, it shows that of the 2019 Conservative voters who are deemed likely to vote again next time, only 55% are intending to still vote Conservative. This compares to 82% of Labour voters still intending to vote Labour. So on its own, that's election losing territory. But Labour are gaining way more votes than they're losing, and the Tories are not. So let's look at where Tory votes are going. So according to YouGov's latest poll, 15% to Labour, 5% to the Lib Dems, and 20% to Reform UK. Now, this is why Tory fears of Reform UK are both understandable but also a little bit witless. So they see 20%, well, that's the biggest chunk, appearing to go to Reform UK, and they see them as their main rivals. What they don't see is that 20%, the same number, are going to Labour and the Lib Dems, and where the Tories really get squeezed is that anything they do to appeal to those former Conservative but now Reform UK voters works to further put off the former Conservative but now Labour or Lib Dem voters. Almost sounds like an impossible situation, except of course by tilting more towards the Reform UK appeal rather than that of the Lib Dems and Labour. They're making a serious error. They're not only tilting towards a smaller, more extreme group of voters on the fringes of politics, whilst moving further away from the majority in the centre ground, but they're not learning the lessons of 2015. In 2015, David Cameron made his ill-fated tilt towards appealing to UKIP type voters. You know, they were riding high in the polls. There was a great deal of fear about them amongst the Conservatives. Well, do you know what? It didn't stop UKIP getting absolutely loads of votes. Over 12% of the vote. Absolutely enormous. Never been seen since or before. Cameron had basically done nothing to bring those voters back. He'd appeased them. Loads of people went out and voted UKIP anyway. But it also didn't stop him winning a majority. And UKIP basically won like one seat. The same will happen in 2024. The Tories will try to appease Reform voters who will still basically vote Reform, but they'll not actually win any seats this time. Only this time, Labour and the Lib Dems are ready to take seats by being presentable to the voters in the centre. In 2015, the Lib Dems were abandoned by core support because of austerity, and Labour were making a right dog's dinner of basically everything by going along with austerity from opposition. This time, both perils are avoided because the Labour and the Lib Dems are in the sort of rebuilding their reputation phase instead of trashing it. And they're ready to gobble up any votes that the Tories choose to abandon. The Lib Dems appear to be changing the way they approach next year's election in some ways. They are one of the parties who really pay a very heavy toll for each seat won, beaten only by the Greens. It takes a silly number of votes to get one seat. The aim now seems to be, rather than present big national policies which get them pockets of supports everywhere, but not enough to win many seats, it looks like they're deciding to focus their policies on target seats in terms of their main messaging. It's something Labour are doing in a sense as well, paying less attention to the messages which might work in seats where they've got no chance or seats where they win by such large margins. It's like, well, why do you need to further plug it? And focus instead on the messages for the winnable but tight contests. Davies also, according to reports, been wargaming scenarios where he becomes personally popular, like Nick Clegg. Now, I think he comes across as likeable enough for many target voters, but I'm not sure he's got any more charisma than any of the other main political leaders right now. But the idea of focusing their main messages on target seats rather than on a national message, which tries to reach out to areas they've got no chance in, that makes sense. It would be better for them in many ways to get a smaller share of the vote, but more seats. Because more seats means more influence in Parliament. Yes, they'll still be in opposition, but more MPs does mean more seats on select committees. For Reform UK, their strategy is a little bit more nuanced and certainly more opaque. The Lib Dems want to win seats and they want to improve their influence in Parliament. It's quite clear, normal party politics. For Reform UK, yes, they want to improve their influence in Parliament, but there they have a couple of options. They can try to become a genuine political party, fight for proportional representation, which they seem to be formally in favour of, and win seats that way. Or, as seems more likely, they can do as UKIP did in their previous incarnation, the Brexit Party. They can give Tory MPs the impression that they're going to cost them lots of seats if they don't find accommodation with them. And instead of trying to win seats, they instead just say to the Tories, do what we want and we'll stand down. It's a strategy that's working. After all, Tory MPs won a majority in both 2015 and 2019. The 2 years where they appeased their far-right cousins. They just failed to realise that the other factor at play was the opposition not presenting a robust challenge. But it does beg the question, will Reform UK stand candidates down strategically to help the Tories next year? Richard Tice, the chair of the party, insists not. But he insisted not in 2019 anyway. In terms of trying to guess, I'm inclined to think that actually they won't stand candidates down this time, although I'm not convinced they will put candidates up in every seat in Britain either. I'm not sure they've got the infrastructure to do that, at least not without inviting a lot of PR cock-ups. We'll see. The main reason I don't think they're going to stand candidates down this time is because they then lose all credibility. If they do it for a second election in a row, who's going to believe them at the following election? The other thing is that the Tories are already focusing more on appealing to Reform voters than voters in the centre. So if they're already doing that with Reform UK claiming that they're going to stand candidates, why wouldn't they just stand them anyway? They can bargain with the Tories later on. After the election, they can say to the next leadership, look, we are open to an electoral pact in return for a couple of things. First, that you adopt policies that we can get on board with. Second, that the offer is reciprocated. Now, that could be quite interesting. In 2019, the Brexit Party tried to agree a pact whereby the Tories would stand down candidates in a few seats for the Brexit Party, and the Brexit Party would then stand down candidates like basically everywhere else that the Tories were after. The Tories told them to sod off. So the Brexit Party were in a weak position and they basically backed down. Now, if the Tories are in opposition, if Reform UK can say to them, look, we took away enough votes from you to make the difference in dozens of seats, then they will be in a stronger position at the next election. They will be able to say, we are only going to stand candidates down for a reciprocal arrangement. You know, it can still be based on the idea that Reform UK only want a few seats from the Tories, but they can insist that they get them. They may feel that they could win some seats if the Tories stand down in a few areas where Reform UK think they could be competitive. And the interesting side effect could be utter devastation for the Tories. Obviously, strategies can change. But if the Lib Dems do decide to focus more on winnable seats, well, that helps Labour as well avoid splitting their vote in their own target areas. If Reform UK want to maximise damage to the Tory vote in order to put them in a strong negotiating position in a few years' time, that means the Tories will have their vote split next year like never before in history. And I mean literally like never before in history. For most of their 200 years in existence, the Conservative Party have had the right wing sewn up. But you could argue recently with the likes of the Brexit Party and UKIP, okay, there's been a bit split there, but that has always coincided with Labour not presenting that challenge. So now for this next election, we are going to get Labour presenting that challenge on the centre ground, and we're going to get the Tories stuck, leaching votes to the centre, leaching votes to the far right. They've never had that. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.